So there is now information about a brand new bill that was now officially just released very recently that we really have to talk about. So hey everyone, how's it going today? And welcome back to another update. So the big news today in today's update that we really want to share is really about pretty much just a couple of things. The first is that we have information now about a brand new bill, and there are also actually certain changes that have now officially been considered. So it's been announced, it's not definite yet, but it is just something that they're now thinking about potentially doing with stuff related to the Ukraine aid situation. And then on top of that, there's now also another third story about a potential $1,000 stimulus check program that's going to be created through a certain interesting change that we kind of have to really be able to explain. If this sounds a little bit confusing, hopefully we promise it's going to make a lot more sense by the end. So with that being said, we're going to get right to it, but as always, real fast, before we begin, consider smashing the like button if you guys hopefully enjoy videos like this. Of course, it is always greatly appreciated, or you can watch to the end to decide. Consider subscribing and hitting the bell as we get hopefully more information. And as always, feel free to comment any questions, personal thoughts about honestly just really anything. We'll leave some videos at the very end screen if you guys are interested. We made a couple videos that really talked about just basically trying to get through different financial situations, finding employment. So if you're currently going through something, it's now in a playlist at the very end. If you guys haven't checked it out, highly recommend. With that being said, let's get back to the video and update. Let's get started. So when it comes to the brand new bill that was recently just introduced, essentially the idea is that there is a brand new proposed bill that was just introduced by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, which this article talks a lot about it. We will probably put the actual bill maybe down below if you guys are interested in checking out. But the summarized version of what this exactly is that it's a bill that they're hoping to actually vote on, interestingly, next week. And the whole purpose of this bill is really to control the gas prices. So the name of this bill is pretty much called the Consumer Fuel Price Gorging Act. And what this is that it's hoping to essentially try to create a limit on the prices of everything related to both gas but also home energy, specifically especially with companies that generate somewhere basically over $500 million worth of annual sales. So that's pretty much every single major gas station that we probably know, you know, like Sunoco, Mobil gas station, Exxon Mobil, like all of those gas stations. But it's not just with gas, it actually also applies to things like home energy. Because the story right now is that the average price of gas was already estimated to be about essentially $4.42. Now, feel free to share what gas is currently like in your state, and of course what state that you're currently in, because it is always very interesting to see. And it's actually very hardcore when you think about it, because for example, I'm up here in New York. We don't have a lot of drivers, but we know for a fact that gas here has definitely risen very significantly. I do know, for example, in California, a lot of people that I know there, supposedly they've reported that gas is now somewhere between $7 to even almost $8 now, or maybe $8 potentially by the time if you're watching this into the future. So how this proposal is going to work is that essentially it's going to create a metric of some kind where it's going to cap the maximum price that companies can price their actual gas. So it's a little bit of like a price control bill. What they're going to do essentially is that they're going to limit it to prevent the gas prices from going up any higher. And of course, because this bill is still a proposal, we don't know what's going to happen. The good news is that there's definitely a lot of support for it. And in fact, it's actually going to be voted on, as mentioned, next week. So we really just have to see what really goes on. Of course, that's just something to be determined. Now, when it comes to the world of the Ukraine aid, so this is actually the part that's actually really interesting and actually pretty important to stimulus checks. The story right now is that inside of Congress, with President Biden and the White House and everyone there, they're currently trying to create a separate package, really in order to try to create funding and aid to help with everything going on with Ukraine and Russia right now over there. So the story is that there is now a brand new proposal that hasn't really been documented, but it has been actually in the works behind the scenes of now trying to consider maybe taking some of that money from the Ukraine aid situation and now turning it into stimulus checks. So how this exactly works is that they want to essentially redirect a lot of the funds that would have gone to Ukraine and try to now use it instead to help out the actual people in our own country, which makes sense. I mean, like, if you're American and, most people here are tax-paying Americans, you would probably like to think that you should be there to try to help out your own people before you try to help other people in other, huge love to other nations. I have a lot of friends that are international, which, which is really, really awesome because you can get things from different perspectives and views. But it is just something I think you would think maybe, they would at least prioritize trying to help a lot of the immediate people that are within their own country right now. But the big idea to what's going on is that this is a major change that really is going to be, that's currently, so not going, but it is already actually being proposed and spoken and supported by, interestingly, a Republican representative named Jim Banks, who wants to essentially turn the $40 billion, that is the amount of money that they're originally trying or currently trying to send over to Ukraine, but instead now trying to turn it in to doing $1,000 stimulus checks for the American people. And again, this is going to be a program that applies to all 50 states if it does end up being approved, but we just have to see what happens. Now, in terms of the actual significance of this specific bill that I think is really, really important to just kind of really consider or think about, is really about the fact right now the story is that, maybe just for a little bit of perspective, is that when it comes to the Ukraine aid, before what we're talking about right now, they actually already approved a $13.6 billion package in order to send some relief money to help Ukraine when the war started, which I think is, thankfully in a lot of ways very, very much needed. So hopefully, each country is able to get the help they, need. So the story is that now they want to upgrade that from $13.6 billion into a $40 billion amount of aid sending over to Ukraine. However, one of the biggest situations that's going on right now is that when you actually physically do the math, what they're currently really stating and seeing right now is that the problem is that inside of our country, we have about over 300 million people. So what's going on is that if you were to try to send 300 million people a $1,000 stimulus check, it's going to cost $300 billion. Simple math to this is 300, sorry if this is going to turn into a math class, but $300 million, you put 3 zeros at the end because each person gets $1,000, so it's going to be $300 billion. So if they were to try to give a $1,000 stimulus check to every single American, it's going to essentially cost them $300 billion, but the Ukraine aid is $40 billion. So $300 billion is very, very different than $40 billion, which is basically about a ninth or a tenth of that. So that's really the current situation. But what they actually did end up finding, or just based off of what, a lot of people are just saying about the math, is that if they were to try to take that $40 billion and actually evenly distribute it among all 300 million people inside of our country, it's going to come out to be right around $120 of a stimulus check for all Americans. So why do I say all of this stuff that's happening is that because of the current situation that's going on right now, the biggest change that's being considered is really about trying to take some of the stimulus money and now trying to redirect and change it into stimulus checks instead of just immediately trying to help foreign affairs. They still want to help foreign affairs. It's very, very important that we maintain international relationships because, every country is kind of tied in a way, to each other. We rely on them for gas. They rely on us for other resources. Every country kind of has their place in the world. But at the end of the day, the biggest reason why we really mention all of this is that because it just really comes down to, at this point, if they were going to try to take the Ukraine aid and turn them into fourth stimulus checks, what's really going to happen is that they're either going to have to just significantly reduce the amount, Or what's probably going to be even more probable is that they very much can still do $1,000 stimulus checks, but instead of just giving it to every single person, they're probably going to, and probably should, if anything, look into potentially now trying to do it on a very focused level. So what this means is that essentially trying to maybe create an income limit, giving it to, you know, very, very specific groups of people maybe making under 40 grand a year. I know that's a lot of people that are watching this right now, so hopefully we can get through that. And this was certainly, you know, what I was going through for most of the pandemic. So it was a very, very difficult time. But the big idea is that it just shows you what's actually physically possible. And I think at the end of the day, it's just very insightful and important to really lay out the map. The actual math to see what is actually feasible. But beyond this is what they also interestingly did calculate very recently is the fact that if you were to take all of the first, the second, and the third stimulus check all together, the total cost, maybe just for general perspective, of doing the first, the second, and the third stimulus check in 2020 and then in 2021, which is wild, that was already 2 years ago, time flew, it costed them about $800 billion. So it's kind of important to really see where these numbers come from. Essentially, Ukraine now currently has $13 billion. They're trying to approve $40 billion. They want to potentially now take that $40 billion and try to turn it into stimulus checks instead. But they did the math, and if every American was to get a $1,000 stimulus check, it's going to cost them $300 billion. They already sent out $800 billion worth of stimulus checks between the first, the second, and third. So their only option really going from here is to just either do a smaller stimulus check or a very, very focused stimulus check. But of course, with all of this, we just have to see what actually physically happens. But I think it is very, very insightful that at least we're starting to see people speak out. And what's very impressive and particularly special about this one is that it actually comes from a Republican. And I think that's actually one of the more interesting things, because normally just objectively, you know, leaving politics aside, but just objectively speaking, you normally see a lot of the blue states that typically are trying to create the aid in order to try to send and help out the people. So that is actually one very interesting thing that really makes this bill particularly special and unique that I think is really important to know. But of course, beyond this is, we just have to see what really goes on happening from here. The big idea really is that right now, according to Congress, they already know that the unemployment rate is currently one of the lowest it's ever been. It's not that it's as accurate as it can be, feel free to comment, but it's just that in statistics, what they're reporting, you know, every single month now, is that the unemployment currently is right around 3 to 4%, but the inflation rate is between 8 to 9%. It's floating around the 8% region right now, most recently 8.3% to be exact. So there's a lot of things that they're very, very afraid about changing, such as like the inflation rate, but they're just trying to control everything that's really happening inside of our country right now. But with that being said, that's pretty much what I really just wanted to share in today's update. So if you guys hopefully found that insightful and made it to the end, huge thanks for watching all the way through. Feel free to maybe comment any questions, personal thoughts, or maybe just the fact that maybe if you made it all the way through. And as always, consider smashing the like button if you guys haven't done so. Consider subscribing and hitting the bell. With that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.